His Favorite Ruin, written by Short Story Queen. Chapter 1. Fire and Flesh. The first thing she remembered was the smell. Acrid smoke. Then the bitter, coppery sting of blood. For a second she thought she was still in the fire, still crawling over burning wood and shattered glass. Lungs clawing for air, dragging a broken leg toward a door that didn't exist. Then came the cold. It wrapped around her like a second skin, invasive and inescapable. Sera Novelli opened her eyes to a ceiling she didn't recognize. Cracked plaster, yellowed with time, a slow drip of water from a pipe above. The air was heavy, still laced with smoke but diluted now by mold and age. Her body ached in ways that didn't feel human. She tried to move. Pain roared up her spine like lightning. She gasped. Somewhere nearby a door creaked open, a shadow entered. He didn't speak right away, just stood in the threshold watching. Tall, broad-shouldered, all in black. His silhouette bled into the gloom like he belonged to it. Where? Her voice cracked, her throat was raw. Where am I? Silence. She tried again. Who are you? Still nothing. He stepped closer and light from the cracked window finally found his face. Sharpened angles, harsh jawline, eyes that didn't look at her so much as assess her, as though deciding whether she was something to save or something to bury. You're alive, he said simply. That's all that matters for now. She tried to sit up. Failed. Her arms trembled. She didn't want to show weakness, especially not to a stranger who spoke like a man who'd seen more dead bodies than living ones, but her body refused to cooperate. You need rest, he said flatly. You've got a concussion, some burns. A fractured rib, maybe two. Nothing that'll kill you. Unless you try to run. Run. The word snapped something inside her. The fire. My family. Her heart stuttered, breath catching. Are they? They're gone. The words dropped with no emotion, no room for hope. Just facts. Sera stared at him. At his stillness. At how easily he'd said it. Her hands balled into fists, nails digging into her palms. You don't know that. You weren't there. I was there, he said. I pulled you out of the wreckage. He let that hang between them like a blade, and her memories fought to surface, flames licking up the walls, the roar of a gunshot, the choking heat of betrayal. Faces, screams. Then, nothing. Just arms around her, lifting her, dragging her through smoke. Then you know who did it. Her voice sharpened. Tell me. He looked away just for a second and she saw it, an unspoken something behind his eyes. Not guilt, not quite. Closer to conflict. I'll get you water, he muttered, turning to leave. No, don't. She tried to push up again, her voice raw with desperation. You can't just leave me here without answers. You're not a prisoner, he said without turning back. But if you walk out that door, you'll be dead in less than an hour, so go ahead. Then he was gone. The silence he left behind was unbearable. Sera let her head fall back against the pillow, eyes wide open. Her breaths came shallow. Her legs were still numb. She shifted, winced, then noticed the burns, bandaged cleanly, tightly. Someone had taken care with her. That confused her more than anything. When the door opened again, it was someone else, a woman this time. Dark red lipstick, tied back black hair, wearing jeans and a hoodie far too clean for a house that looked like a ruin. You're awake, she said briskly. Her voice was low, clipped. About time. You've been in and out for 2 days. Sera didn't respond. I'm Giada, the woman continued, setting down a glass of water and a bowl of something that looked suspiciously like soup. I'm the one keeping your lungs from collapsing. So, try to be polite. You work for him? Giada arched a brow. Define work. Then who is he? Giada hesitated. That alone gave Sera her answer. Whoever he wasn't just a man with a guilty conscience and a spare bed. Dante Luca, she said at last. If you don't know the name, you've been living under a rock. No. She knew the name. She just hadn't wanted to believe it. The Luca Syndicate. Northern Mafia. Her family's rivals for nearly 2 decades. Her father used to curse that name like it was a plague. Sera's mouth went dry. Why would he save me? Giada didn't answer, she just pushed the soup forward. Eat before your blood sugar drops and you faint. Again. Later, when she was alone again, Sera tried to sit fully upright. This time, she managed it. Her limbs trembled under her weight, but she stayed upright. Pain bloomed behind her eyes like a migraine, but she forced herself to take stock of her surroundings. The room was sparse, cement floors, iron bars on the window. Not like a prison, more like a fortress. A rusted crucifix hung crooked on the far wall. In the corner sat a battered armchair and a crate filled with old books. Whoever lived here didn't care for beauty or comfort. The door opened once more. Dante entered, a bottle of something dark in one hand. No smile, no warmth. Just a man carved from stone and shadow. Feeling better? He asked without irony. Why am I here? She whispered. Really? He studied her a long time, then approached the bed slowly, stopped at the edge, his height a quiet threat, but not one he moved to act on. Because I was supposed to kill you, he said, and I didn't. Sera stared at him. Why not? A flicker crossed his face then, too fast to read. He looked down at her, voice low, controlled. I don't know yet. Then he left her with that, and the silence afterward was louder than the fire. Chapter 2. The House of Wolves. The house was the kind of place built to be forgotten. Set back behind a forest road where the trees grew too close and the sky looked like it had been drained of color, the estate didn't whisper, it warned. The stone walls sagged under their own weight, vines clinging to every surface like hands that refused to let go. Inside, time had collapsed into a half-finished sentence. The floors creaked like old bones. The air carried the taste of rust, mold, and old blood, the kind that never fully faded, even after being scrubbed clean. Sera hadn't seen the outside yet, but she could feel it in the bones of the house. This wasn't a place where people lived. It was where things were hidden, or buried. She stayed in the bed for hours after Dante's confession. Her mind drifted through memories she didn't want. Her father's voice at the dinner table, her brother's laugh echoing through the halls, her mother's hand smoothing her hair the night before it all ended. Faces now gone, burned. She didn't need to be told how final it was. You could feel absence when it was that deep. It filled the air like fog, seeping under skin, into the lungs. And then there was Dante, his name now attached to something permanent. The man who was supposed to kill her, the man who chose not to. It should have made him a hero. It didn't. He hadn't saved her from kindness. That much was obvious in his movements, the cold efficiency with which he looked at her, like she was both problem and puzzle. He didn't want her alive for her sake. She was useful to him. How? She didn't yet know. Late afternoon crept into evening. The light shifted from dull to murky. Shadows lengthened, and the house grew quieter. The kind of silence that makes the mind invent sounds. Sera forced herself up, teeth clenched as the pain in her side flared. She moved slowly, wrapping one arm around her ribs as she walked, barefoot, toward the hall. The door hadn't been locked, he was right, she wasn't a prisoner. But freedom was relative. Every step she took carried the weight of uncertainty. She didn't know the layout of the house or who else might be inside. She only knew she needed to see more than 4 walls. She needed to feel like a person again, not just a survivor bandaged into silence. The hallway opened into what had once been a library. Books filled the shelves in wild disarray, some stacked, some fallen, a few covered in dust so thick their titles were unreadable. A low fire crackled in a hearth that looked long disused, but there was no warmth in the room, just that lingering chill and the faint scent of whiskey and cedar. She was halfway across the room when she saw him. Dante stood at the far window, one arm braced against the frame, the other holding a cigarette loosely between his fingers. The light touched only part of his face, leaving the rest in shadow. He didn't turn when he spoke. "You shouldn't be up." She ignored the command in his voice. "I didn't come to ask permission." The silence stretched, but she held her ground. He finally looked at her, the faintest trace of amusement or perhaps recognition crossing his face. "You sound like your father." "You knew him?" "Well enough to know he wouldn't have gone down without a fight." Sera crossed her arms, flinching as it pulled at the healing burns along her shoulder. "Then you also know he would have died protecting me." Dante took another drag from his cigarette, exhaled slowly. The smoke curled around his face, softening the harsh lines for just a moment. "He tried," he said. "Didn't work." She wanted to hit him, or scream, or fall apart. Instead, she walked to the nearest chair and sat carefully, wincing as her ribs complained. If he noticed, he didn't comment. "This place," she said after a moment. "What is it?" "A safe house." She let her gaze drift across the room, peeling wallpaper, dust-coated floors, furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in a decade. "Looks more like a mausoleum." That got a twitch of his mouth, not quite a smile. "It used to be used for business." He didn't elaborate, but she understood. It had the feel of a place where secrets were kept, and not gently. Now it's off the grid. No cameras, no visitors, no questions. "And Giada? She's here because I trust her not to ask any." "You trust someone?" Another twitch of the mouth, this one sharper. "Not easily." There was a pause then, not tense but thick with the weight of all they didn't say. He didn't offer her a drink, didn't ask if she needed help. He just stood there like a statue planted in grief, in something colder than memory. Sera studied him more closely now. The gloves. The faint twitch in his jaw when she spoke too directly. The way his fingers moved with slow deliberation, like he was always one breath away from snapping something. Someone in half. He wasn't just a man who knew violence, he carried it with him, wore it like a second skin. "Why didn't you turn me in?" she asked, her voice quieter now. He looked at her fully then. No shadows, just his eyes. Impossible to read. Not cruel, not kind, just tired. "Because I need to know what happened," he said. "The truth. I don't have it. You might." And that was it. No threats, no bargaining, just a statement. He didn't need to make her fear him. He knew he could. That made him more dangerous than anyone she'd met. She leaned back, breath catching slightly from the movement. "So, I'm leverage." "You're alive," he said again, like that was the only answer she was going to get. He dropped the cigarette into the fire and walked out without another word. Sera sat there long after the sound of his footsteps faded. The fire cracked behind her. Somewhere above, a pipe hissed. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees. The house didn't feel like a safe place. It felt like a place people were forgotten. And if she wasn't careful, it would forget her too. But Dante hadn't killed her. And that meant something. She just didn't know if it was mercy or strategy. Chapter 3. You're not a ghost. The first true morning Sera saw in the house came as a dim, reluctant light pressing itself through filthy window panes. It was pale, almost metallic, the kind of light that made every edge sharper, every shadow longer. She had slept badly, drifting in and out of dreams where fire crawled across ceilings, voices called her name and then dissolved into smoke. When she woke, the sheets were damp against her skin, the bandages on her ribs stiff with dried salve. The house hummed faintly, pipes clanking in the walls, some unseen boiler breathing low in the cellar. It was an old sound, like a creature stirring beneath the floorboards. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat there until the trembling in her thighs eased. Giada had left clean clothes, a plain shirt and loose trousers, nothing of her own, folded on the chair. When Sera put them on, she felt like she was slipping into someone else's life, someone who didn't belong to any family at all. She left the room slowly, one hand trailing along the wall as she moved down the hallway. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cigarette ash. Somewhere in the distance, a door opened, then closed. She followed the sound to the kitchen. The kitchen was wide but neglected, as if no one had cooked here in years. Dust clung to the cupboards. The tile grout had gone black. Only the long wooden table was clear, wiped down with recent care. A cup of coffee sat waiting, steam still curling from its surface. Across the room, Dante leaned against the counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, gloves gone, a pale scar crossing the back of one hand like an old strike of lightning. He didn't speak. She didn't either. The silence between them wasn't the brittle silence of strangers anymore. It had begun to feel like something deliberate, like both were waiting to see which would break first. Sera went to the cup and sat at the table. The first sip burned her tongue, but the bitterness steadied her. The coffee tasted stronger than anything she'd had in weeks. He watched her drink, eyes heavy but unreadable. There was no cruelty in the way he looked at her, but no softness either. More like a craftsman studying a crack in a piece of stone, trying to decide if it could still be shaped or if it should be discarded. "You're awake earlier than I thought," he said at last, his voice carrying that low, rough edge like gravel beneath water. "I'm not sure I slept," she said. Her voice surprised her. It was hoarser than she expected. "You will," he said. "Eventually." He moved past her to the stove, poured himself coffee from a dented metal pot. His movements were precise, practiced. She had the sense that everything about him had been built that way, muscles trained, voice trained, even the pauses in his speech. "I remember pieces of the night," she said quietly, her eyes on the dark liquid in her cup. "The fire, the shouting, but not how I got out." "I pulled you out through the back terrace here," he said, as if describing something mundane. "You were unconscious." She let that sit between them. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a long drink, then set his cup down with a soft click. "Because leaving you there would have been inefficient." That word, inefficient, hit her harder than any threat. It told her exactly how he thought. Sera set her cup down slowly. "I keep waiting to wake up from this," she murmured. "But every time I open my eyes, it's still here. This house. You." Now his gaze slid to hers, holding it. There was something there she hadn't seen before, a flicker of recognition, almost pain. "You're not a ghost," he said. "You survived." She didn't answer. The word survived landed like a stone. Surviving meant being left behind, a piece of debris after a storm. Dante came closer, footsteps soft against the tile. He stopped at the edge of the table, bracing his hands on the wood. "You don't remember much," he said. "But you will. And when you do, I need the truth." Her hands tightened around the cup, the porcelain warm against her palms. "The truth about what?" "About your father," he said. "About what he was planning before the fire. About who else he was speaking to." Sera raised her eyes to his. "You think I know something?" "I know you do," he said simply. She almost laughed at the certainty in his voice. Instead, she forced herself to breathe evenly, her ribs aching. "I was the diplomatic daughter," she said finally, a trace of bitterness creeping in. "Tea parties, charity dinners, smiling, and photographs. Do you think anyone told me the real deals?" "I think you saw more than you realized." He said it without malice, but it cut anyway. She looked at him, at the scarred hands braced on the table, at the hollow under his eyes where sleep should have been. He was built for violence, but wore it like a coat too heavy to take off. Sera pushed her chair back slowly, standing on unsteady legs. "Maybe I don't remember because I don't want to." He straightened, watching her carefully. That's not how memory works. Maybe it is, she whispered, and turned from him before he could say anything else. She left the kitchen and walked deeper into the house, past doorways leading to rooms full of old furniture, past walls where the wallpaper had curled like dried leaves. At the end of one hall, a narrow door opened onto a courtyard, its stones slick with moss. She stepped out into the damp air. The garden was wild, overgrown with weeds and brambles, but she could see the skeleton of what it had once been: ornamental hedges, carved stone benches, a dry fountain in the center. A place that had once held life, now abandoned. She sat on the edge of the fountain, pulling her knees up gently, ignoring the sting in her ribs. The cold of the stone bled through her thin clothes, but she welcomed it. It made her feel awake. Somewhere inside, a door closed. Footsteps echoed, then faded. She didn't need to look back to know it was Dante. He moved through the house like a shadow that had learned to walk. Sera closed her eyes for a moment, inhaling the damp scent of moss and old water. The garden might have been a sanctuary once. Now it felt like a warning. She wasn't sure if she was the guest or the next name on the wall, but she was breathing. Her heart still beat. She was not a ghost, even if she felt like one, and as long as she stayed alive, she would find out why he had saved her, and at what cost. Chapter 4. The Scar Beneath the Skin. Night arrived in the house without ceremony. No sunset bled across the windows, only a slow dimming until the rooms became shapes within shapes, corners folding into blackness. In the courtyard, the air turned colder. Sera had stayed there until her fingers numbed, her breath showing in faint threads. Inside, she could hear Giada moving somewhere above. Soft footsteps, the click of a door. No voices. Dante's presence was harder to place, but she could feel it like a shift in temperature, a sense of being watched even when she couldn't see him. By the time she forced herself back inside, the house smelled of antiseptic. In the library, a single lamp burned on the desk, its glow drawing a small circle of light over a scattering of papers. Sera passed it without pausing, her feet quiet on the warped wood floor. The pain in her ribs had deepened into a dull ache. Her burns, though, were beginning to itch under the bandages, the first sign of healing. She reached her room and shut the door softly. The bed looked too big, too white against the gray walls. She sat on the edge and peeled away the loose shirt Giada had given her. The bandages on her shoulder had come undone at the edges, curling back like old bark. She tried to smooth them down, but her hands trembled. When the knock came, it startled her. A low rap, not tentative but not harsh either. Before she could answer, the door opened. Dante stepped inside carrying a small tin box. He didn't ask permission. "You're tearing the dressings," he said, crossing to her without waiting for a reply. "I can do it myself," she said quietly. He stopped just in front of her, the faint smell of smoke and iron around him. "If you could, you wouldn't be bleeding through the bandage." She wanted to tell him to leave. She wanted to tell him to stay. Instead, she sat still while he set the tin on the nightstand and knelt in front of her. The movement surprised her. This man who never bent, lowering himself until he was level with her. His hands were bare again, scarred, knuckles rough, nails kept short. He opened the tin, revealing gauze, salve, a small pair of scissors. Everything neat, methodical. Without speaking, he began to unwind the bandage from her shoulder. The fabric stuck to the healing burns. She winced. He paused. "Sorry," he said, the word sounding strange in his mouth. She tilted her head slightly to look at him. The light from the hallway outlined his jaw, his lashes casting faint shadows on his cheekbones. For the first time, he didn't look carved from stone. He looked tired, human. He finished removing the bandage and set it aside. The burn scars ran like pale rivers across her shoulder blade, raised and angry. His fingers hovered above them for a moment, but didn't touch. "Who did this to you?" he asked, voice low. "The fire," she said, "and whoever started it." He nodded once. Then, with a carefulness that almost unnerved her, he took a clean cloth, dipped it into the salve, and began to work it gently into the raw skin. His hands were steady. The salve was cool, almost cold, but his fingers radiated warmth. Sera stared at the wall, her breath coming slow. She hadn't been touched like this since before the fire. Not with violence, not with hunger, but with something that felt like concentration. "You've killed people," she said suddenly. It wasn't a question. He didn't stop what he was doing. "Yes." "Many?" "Yes." She closed her eyes briefly. "Do you ever see them?" The silence stretched. He smoothed more salve over the burn, wrapped a fresh bandage around her shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that she almost missed it. "Every night," he said. He tied off the bandage neatly. "You'll heal," he added. But it didn't sound like a reassurance, more like a fact he was forcing himself to believe. Sera opened her eyes and turned slightly toward him. "Is that what this is?" she asked. "Me. Hidden here. You think keeping me alive will heal you?" His eyes met hers then, and for a second she saw it. Something sharp and raw beneath the control. He didn't answer. She almost reached for him. Almost. But the moment broke before she could move. He stood, picking up the tin, his face unreadable again. "Try not to tear the bandage," he said, moving toward the door. At the threshold he stopped, his back to her. The silence stretched so thin it was almost soundless. "I don't know what you think of me," he said at last, "but I didn't save you for redemption." Before she could ask him why, he opened the door and left. The room felt larger after he was gone, as if his absence had pulled some of the air out. Sera lay back slowly, her body warm from the salve, her shoulder bound in fresh white. She stared at the ceiling until the cracks blurred into lines she couldn't read. Somewhere far off, a door closed. The house exhaled around her. She wondered if he was lying. Not about why he'd saved her, but about what it was doing to him. The scars were under her skin, but she had begun to see his too. Chapter 5. Not yours to keep. The mirror in the upstairs bathroom was cracked diagonally, a jagged fracture that split Sera's reflection down the center of her face. She stood before it, one hand resting on the chipped porcelain sink, the other combing through the wild tangle of curls that had become a snarl of knots and ash. There was no brush, just her fingers and the patience to work through what had been left neglected. The skin along her collarbone had begun to pink where the burns were healing, tender but no longer open. Her face was thinner than she remembered. Cheekbones sharpened, shadows pressed into the hollows beneath her eyes. She no longer looked like a Novelli daughter groomed for appearances. She looked like something that had clawed its way out of the ground and was still deciding whether to rise or lie back down. A noise echoed below, wood groaning, then the soft thump of a door closing. Dante had returned from wherever he disappeared to each day, never announcing himself, only appearing when silence had stretched long enough to make the house forget it had occupants. Sera took her time leaving the bathroom. She moved with more steadiness now, enough that she no longer feared collapsing with every step. The pain in her ribs had dulled into a background ache. The house, though still quiet and sprawling in its forgotten grandeur, had begun to feel less like a trap and more like a puzzle. Each room a memory someone had tried to erase, each object a clue to the lives it had swallowed. She found Dante in the downstairs hallway, standing at the window where ivy had nearly overtaken the view. He didn't turn as she entered, just spoke in that quiet, heavy voice that always sounded like it was pulling itself from some deeper place. "There's movement down south. Matteo's circling the old Novelli estate." She leaned against the wall, folding her arms carefully. "Looking for me. Or pretending he's not." The space between them was filled with something neither of them addressed, something that had started in the nights when he tended her wounds, and deepened in the long silences they shared, the ones heavy with the knowledge of what couldn't be said aloud. Sera studied his back, his shoulders always tense, the line of his spine under the worn fabric of his shirt. He had removed his gloves again. She had begun to notice when he did that, small signs that meant something, even if he never explained them. You always stand like that when you're waiting for a storm, she said. His head tilted slightly. There's always a storm coming. She pushed off the wall and stepped toward him. Slowly, deliberately. I used to think the world would end in fire or bullets. Something big. Something final. It doesn't? No, she said, coming to stand beside him. It ends with forgetting who you were before it all burned down. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The ivy scraped faintly against the window, stirred by the wind. Outside, the sky had turned the color of steel, clouds sliding like bruises over the horizon. Sera turned toward him, and for once he didn't retreat into distance. He met her gaze, steady and unreadable, but there was something behind his eyes now. Fatigue, yes, but also a kind of hunger, quiet and aching. She reached up, fingers brushing his jaw. The contact was barely there, light enough that it could have been a trick of the wind, but he went still beneath it, as if unsure whether to breathe or speak or move. You look at me like you want to believe something that isn't true, she said softly. His jaw shifted under her hand, but he didn't pull away. And what's that? That I'm still the girl they dressed up in silk and called harmless. His hand lifted slowly, fingers curling around her wrist, not tightly but with intent. The pressure of his skin against hers felt heavier than it should have. You're not harmless, he said. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence stretched again, and then she stepped closer, until the space between them wasn't space anymore. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe differently, but she could feel the restraint in him like something caged and pacing just beneath the surface. She tilted her head just slightly. Her mouth hovered near his jaw, near the corner of his lips, near enough that every second passed like a held breath. When she finally kissed him, it was without warning, without softness, not desperate, but deliberate. The kind of kiss that didn't ask permission, didn't wait for timing. It simply happened, because waiting any longer would be dishonest. And for a moment, just a moment, he let it happen. His mouth moved against hers, slow and rough, full of something buried deep. But then, just as quickly, he pulled away. Not violently, not even angrily. He stepped back as though the floor had shifted beneath him, his breath uneven, hands at his sides. No, he said. One word. Ragged. Final. Sera blinked. Why not? His eyes met hers, and something about the look in them chilled her. Not rejection, not even anger, but something darker. Because you don't get to want me, he said, voice flat. I'm not yours to keep. He turned before she could answer, his footsteps fading down the hallway like a sentence that had no ending. Sera stood there unmoving. The space he had occupied still hummed with the heat of him, but the silence that followed felt colder than before. She brought her fingers to her lips. They still held the taste of him. Bitter, electric, brief. Whatever had opened between them in that moment had closed just as fast. But she had seen what lived behind his silence, and now that the door had cracked open, she didn't believe for a second that it would stay shut. Chapter 6. The Interrogation. The cellar door groaned when it opened, its hinges dry with age. Sera stood at the threshold, the dim light from the hallway falling uselessly into the narrow stairwell below. What lay beyond was cold and black and heavy, with silence, the kind of silence that felt deliberate. She hesitated, not because she was afraid of the dark. No, that part of her had been burned away with everything else, but because she knew this wasn't just a room. It was a choice. Dante hadn't said where he was taking her. He didn't raise his voice or issue threats. He didn't need to. His quiet was its own kind of force. When he'd knocked on her door earlier that evening, there was no anger in his face, no tension in his hands, only a watchfulness. He'd told her to follow him. Nothing more. And she had. Now she stood at the top of the stairs, the air growing colder as it drifted up from the dark below. Behind her, the rest of the house slept beneath its veil of memory. Down here, something else waited. He walked ahead of her, each step on the wooden stairs slow, deliberate. She followed. Not because she trusted him, but because the time for pretending had passed. The cellar was older than the rest of the house, older than the war between their families. The floor was stone, worn smooth by years of footsteps. There were iron hooks set into the walls, a drain in the center of the floor. The walls held the faint scent of rust and something older. Old blood, maybe, or old fear. Dante flicked a switch. A single bulb flared above, humming faintly, casting a circle of dim light across the center of the room. Shadows clung to the edges. He turned to her slowly. Sit. There was only one chair, heavy, wooden, a relic of another time. Sera didn't move. Not yet. Am I your prisoner now? She asked, her voice calm but steady. No, he said, but you're going to answer me. She looked at the chair again, then back at him. And if I don't? I think you will. She didn't know if that was a threat or a truth. Maybe both. Still, she sat. The chair creaked under her weight, and the cold from the floor seeped up into her bare feet. Dante leaned against the wall, arms folded. The gloves were back on. She wondered what that meant, if they were armor or ritual. You know why I kept you alive, he said. She didn't respond. I've had people whispering to me for weeks that the Novelli family was planning to break the treaty, that your father had meetings, private, quiet, outside the family. He stepped closer, the light catching on the edge of his jaw. I want to know who he was meeting, what he was planning. Sera let out a breath. You think I sat at his desk and read his letters? No, he said. I think he trusted you more than you realize. And I think you're smart enough to have noticed what others didn't. She looked past him, to the stone wall, to the rusted drain, to the faint scratches carved into the wood near her hand. This wasn't a room for conversation. It was a room for breaking people. I didn't know he was planning anything, she said at last, but I knew something was wrong. He stopped speaking in front of us, took calls at odd hours. He sent my brother away 2 weeks before the fire, said it was for safety, but he didn't explain why. Dante's brow tensed. Where did he send him? I don't know, I asked. He wouldn't say. He was silent, thinking, calculating. Sera could almost see the map forming behind his eyes. She leaned forward slightly, the wood pressing into her spine. What are you really trying to find, Dante? Proof that Matteo ordered the massacre? Or permission to finally stop being his dog? His gaze snapped to hers. Not with anger, but something sharper. A reaction, at last. She held it. You want me to say something you already believe? That my father was planning a betrayal? That Matteo used it as justification? That you're not complicit, just misled? That you saved me because somewhere inside you, you're trying to undo what you've done? The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Dante stepped closer, not fast, not threatening, just enough that the shadows shifted behind him. Is there something you're not telling me? He asked. She looked up at him. Yes. Silence, and he waited. I found something after the fire, she said. When I went back to the ruins with your friend Giada. His expression didn't change, but she saw it in his shoulders, the slight tightening. There was a floor panel in my father's study, hidden, burned but not destroyed. I found a drive. What was on it? She hesitated, then, slowly, she reached into her waistband and pulled it free. Small, silver, cold from being tucked against her skin. She set it on the armrest between them. I haven't looked at it yet, she said, but I think it holds what you're looking for. Dante stared at it for a long time. He didn't reach for it, just studied it like it might bite. And you're giving it to me? I'm giving you the chance to decide what kind of man you are." For a moment, the room was breathless, even the bulb seemed to dim. Then Dante took the drive, turned it slowly between his fingers. He didn't pocket it, didn't even look at her. Just stood there, silent. "You saved me," Sera said quietly. "That means something. But you can't keep pretending this ends with you pulling me out of the fire." She stood. Her legs were stiff, her hands cold. She walked past him without waiting for a response. The door creaked behind her, then closed with a low final sound. Above her, the house was still. The hallway stretched like a throat waiting to swallow her. But something in the air had shifted. A fuse had been lit, and what came next would not be gentle. Chapter 7. The First and the Last Time. The rain started just after midnight. It came without wind, without warning, falling straight down in a heavy, slow rhythm that seemed to echo against the stone of the old estate. Sera lay awake, her body restless beneath the thin blanket, the ceiling above her barely visible in the dark. The sound filled every room, gentle but unrelenting, a quiet percussion that kept her mind from settling. The flash drive was gone. She had seen Dante take it, slip it into the pocket of his coat, and walk away without a word. No explanation, no reassurance, just that familiar silence of his, the kind that said everything and nothing at once. She had watched him unravel slowly over the last few days. Small gestures, shifts in posture, the way his voice would catch slightly before saying her name. He hadn't used it often. In fact, he rarely called her anything at all. But she could feel it in the way he moved around her, the way he lingered a little too long in the doorway when he thought she was sleeping, the way he touched her skin when tending to her burns. Not like a man used to tenderness, but like someone studying the feeling of it for the first time. And now he had the truth, or part of it. Whatever was on that drive, it would tell him things he already suspected. Maybe worse. Maybe more. Sera didn't know what it meant for her, or for him, only that something had shifted and the silence between them had begun to crack. She got out of bed. The floor was cold under her bare feet, the air damp. She didn't bother with the robe. The house had stripped her of pretense days ago, and she had no one left to dress for. She moved through the hallway with the soft, careful steps of someone who'd memorized the creaks in the boards. His door was ajar, just slightly. She paused there, hand on the edge, listening. The room beyond was darker than hers. No lamp. Just the faint outline of his shape in the chair near the window, broad shoulders hunched forward, head bowed slightly. He hadn't heard her, or more likely, he had and was waiting for her to speak. She pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. He didn't move. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice low. "I know," he said, and the words were quiet, steady, not warm, not cold, just true. She stood behind him for a moment longer before circling around to face him. His eyes met hers, unreadable, even in the dark. There was a weariness there, but not the kind that came from lack of rest. It was older, deeper. "You read it," she said. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. She waited for him to speak, to explain what he'd found, what it meant, what came next, but he didn't. Instead, he just reached for the cigarette pack on the table beside him, drew one out, and lit it with a small flick of flame. The smoke curled upward slowly, tracing the space between them. "You were right," he said at last. She swallowed. "About what?" "Everything." He said it like a confession, like an admission dragged from a place he hadn't meant anyone to reach. And there, in that moment, she saw the part of him that had been breaking all along. Not from guilt, not exactly, but from being used. From being loyal to something that no longer deserved it. Maybe never had. "I don't know what to do with it," he said after a moment. "The truth, it doesn't feel like a weapon. It feels like a curse." Sera stepped closer, slowly, carefully, until she was close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands trembled slightly as he held the cigarette. "You already knew what it was," she said. "You just didn't want it to be real." He looked at her then, really looked, and something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness, but surrender. "I killed for him," he said, the words rough at the edges. "For Matteo, for the syndicate, for what I thought was family, and now, all I have left is you." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was full, heavy with breath and storm, and the gravity of what hadn't yet been done. Sera reached out and took the cigarette from his fingers, pressing it out slowly in the ashtray beside him. Then, without a word, she climbed into his lap. He didn't stop her. He didn't ask why. His hands stayed still at his sides until she cupped his face, and then they moved, one to her waist, the other to her thigh, like he was afraid to grip too tightly, afraid he might leave a bruise. Or worse, afraid she might disappear. She kissed him like she didn't care about any of that. There was no hesitation, no gentleness, only need. Raw, complicated, human. The kind of need that had been building under their skin since the first moment she opened her eyes and saw him in the shadows. He kissed her back like he hadn't known how to ask for it, but had been starving for it all the same. No words, no questions, just the press of mouths and hands and breath that refused to come steady. She didn't know how long it lasted. It wasn't soft or slow or sweet. It wasn't anything made for storytelling. It was something else entirely, something built from ruin, from silence, from the ache of too many things left unspoken. When it ended, they didn't speak. He lay beside her on the narrow bed, chest rising and falling beneath her cheek, one hand resting gently on her back like he wasn't sure whether to hold her or let her go. The rain kept falling outside, steady, constant, washing the night clean, or trying to. Sera closed her eyes and listened to the sound of it. For a moment it was enough to believe that this wasn't a beginning or an ending, but something in between. A breath held between waves, a truth wrapped in silence, the space where the scar met the skin. She didn't need promises, not yet. She just needed him to stay. Chapter 8. Blood in the water. Dawn broke slow and colorless. A pale light crawled across the windows, pushing long shadows from the corners of the room, but doing nothing to warm them. The rain had stopped some time before morning, leaving the world outside slick and silent. Inside the house, nothing stirred, not even the usual groan of pipes or distant footsteps. Sera woke alone. The sheets beside her were still warm, creased from the shape of a body no longer there. The air held his scent. Smoke, salt, something darker. She sat up slowly, careful of the stiffness in her limbs, the dull ache in her ribs. The quiet felt wrong. It wasn't the soft silence of sleep. It was the kind that came before something cracked. She wrapped herself in the thin robe, crossed the room, and opened the door into the hallway. It was empty. The light outside was brighter now, washed out and sharp, and the air had taken on that strange stillness that only came after a storm. Something held in suspension. She descended the stairs barefoot, each step measured, the wood cold beneath her. The kitchen was empty, the library too. The back door stood half open, the breeze lifting it just enough to let it creak. Something in her chest tightened. The garden was wet and dark with dew, the weeds glistening under the sky. She stepped outside, gravel sticking to the soles of her feet. That was when she saw the blood. It trailed in a broken smear across the stone path, already beginning to dry. A small pool had formed near the hedge, darker than the rainwater, thick and quiet. Her breath caught in her throat. "Giada," a voice rasped behind her. Sera turned. Dante stood in the doorway, his shirt streaked with red, one hand still gripping the handle of a gun. His chest rose and fell like he'd been running, though she doubted he had. There was something wild behind his eyes, something unhinged and barely contained. She stepped toward him, but he lifted a hand. "Stay there," he said, not as a command, but as a plea. She froze. "What happened?" "They found us," he said. "Two of Matteo's men, they were in the woods, watching the house, waiting." Her heart beat hard against her ribs. "How did they—" "I don't know." he said, voice thin. Giada went out back. I heard the shot. Sera's throat tightened. Is she? She's alive, he said. Barely. I got to her in time, took them both out. He stepped down into the garden, wiping the gun clean with a cloth that looked far too white a few hours ago. His knuckles were scraped. One side of his jaw was starting to bruise. I buried them, he said, nodding toward the woods. But this changes everything. She didn't need to ask what he meant. The illusion of safety, the fragile, crumbling peace of their self-imposed exile, had shattered. Matteo knew, or suspected. Either way, he had acted. And that meant this wasn't a hiding place anymore. Sera stepped forward now, reaching for his hand. He didn't resist, but his fingers were stiff, stained red at the edges. I'm sorry, he said. And for what? For dragging you into this. You didn't drag me, she said softly. I was already in it. You just didn't leave me behind. He looked at her then, really looked, eyes dark with something unreadable, jaw tense, breath uneven. I almost lost you. But you didn't. He pulled his hand away, not roughly, just enough to walk past her, staring out into the trees. The woods loomed, silent, wet, thick with fog. Somewhere out there, two bodies lay buried beneath shallow earth. Matteo's not going to stop now, he said. He sent 2 men. Next time it'll be more. Smarter. Faster. Sera wrapped her arms around herself. The morning had turned colder. The air sharp with the scent of iron and wet leaves. What are you going to do, she asked. I'm going to end it. His voice didn't rise, he didn't rage. But the finality in it was colder than the air, sharper than any blade. She could feel it settle in her bones. He had made a decision. And when Dante made decisions, there was no undoing them. I'll take the drive to him, he said. Make it look like I've come to negotiate. Get close enough to finish it. No, she said quickly. It's suicide. It's necessary. You don't even know what's on that drive, what you'll be walking into. I know enough, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. I know he's been cutting deals behind the family's back, that he used your father as the excuse to clean house. I know I've killed for a man who's been selling out his own blood. The words hit hard, not just because of what they meant, but because of how they were said. With clarity, with sorrow, but no hesitation. She stepped closer, her voice low. If you go to him, he'll see it in your face. You're not who you were. He'll know. Dante didn't flinch, that's the point. The silence hung between them, thick and unsaid. You don't have to do this alone, she said, and I already am. She could feel it happening then, the space between them growing wider, not with distance, but with purpose. He had made peace with what came next. She had not. I didn't survive the fire to lose you in another, she said. His jaw shifted. There was something behind his eyes then, not fear, not anger, grief. You didn't survive the fire, he said almost gently. You became someone new in it, same as me. He brushed past her again toward the door, and for a moment she thought he might go inside and leave it there. But then he paused, one hand resting on the frame. I'll leave at dawn, he said. Tonight, stay inside, lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but me. She watched as he stepped inside and disappeared down the hallway, his shadow swallowed by the house. The garden was still bleeding beneath her feet. She stood there long after he was gone, the morning sharp and wet and full of ghosts. The peace had broken. The wolves had come. And there was no going back. Not for either of them. Chapter 9. The Offer. The hour before dawn had its own kind of stillness, not peaceful, not quiet, but tense, like the world had taken one long breath and was holding it, waiting for the first crack of morning to decide whether the day would bring blood or mercy. Dante moved through the house like a man already halfway gone. He had showered, dressed, checked and rechecked the weapon beneath his coat. His gloves were back on, those familiar black things that had become a second skin, both a shield and a confession. He carried the flash drive tucked inside a folded envelope, sealed and silent, like a secret you hand over knowing you'll never get it back. He didn't say goodbye, and not at first. Sera stood at the bottom of the stairs, barefoot in the shirt she'd pulled from his drawer the night before, the hem falling to her knees. Her arms were folded across her chest, not from cold, but from the weight of what neither of them could control anymore. The house felt too large behind her, the air too sharp. "Tell me this isn't the end," she said. He looked at her. Not with softness, not with fear. Just with a kind of quiet inevitability. "It's the only way it ends," he said. She stepped forward, the wood creaking under her feet. "So that's it? You walk in with a loaded gun and a flash drive and hope Matteo lets you get close enough to pull the trigger." "He won't expect me to shoot him. He still thinks I'm his." "He's not stupid, Dante. He's paranoid. That makes him dangerous." "That makes him predictable," he said, voice low. "He'll want to gloat. He'll talk first. That's all I need." Sera reached for him, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. "Don't do this like you have nothing to lose." His eyes dropped to her hand. She didn't let go. "I don't want you to be another body I have to bury in my memory," she whispered. "You won't." "You don't know that." "No," he said. "But if I don't try, there'll be more bodies. And you'll be one of them." She let her hand fall, the cold biting at her skin where he'd been. "When do you leave?" "Now." He stepped past her and opened the front door. The sky beyond was still slate gray, the trees silhouetted against a horizon not yet decided. The car was already waiting in the gravel drive, engine low and steady like a slow heartbeat. Sera followed him to the door but didn't cross the threshold. Something about it felt final, like if she stepped over it, the moment would become a goodbye. He paused at the open door. "If I come back," he started, then stopped. She waited. But he didn't finish the thought. He just nodded once and stepped into the morning. The door closed behind him with a sound too soft for how much it took with it. The safe house Matteo had chosen was a lakeside property outside of Salerno. Secluded, expensive, the kind of place you sent your enemies to drink wine before you killed them. Dante arrived just after sunrise. The guards at the gate let him through without a word. No questions. No searches. That told him everything he needed to know. Matteo wanted this to look like a meeting between family. A reconciliation. He was walked through the estate by a man he didn't recognize. Young, cocky, wearing sunglasses before the sun had fully risen. The kind of soldier who hadn't earned his scars yet. Inside, the house was all marble and glass, the floors too clean, the air too sweet. It reeked of the kind of power that tried too hard to look effortless. Matteo waited in the sunroom. White shirt, sleeves rolled, gold watch catching the light. His smile was as practiced as ever. Elegant, teeth just visible, eyes never quite meeting yours. "Cousin," he said, arms wide. "You've been missed." Dante didn't speak. He walked to the center of the room and set the envelope on the table between them. Matteo's smile tightened. "What's this?" "Insurance," Dante said. "The drive. From Sera's father's estate." Matteo didn't touch it, not yet. "And what do you think I'll find on it?" "You already know what's on it." "Then why bring it?" "To give you a choice." Matteo's expression darkened just slightly, enough for the truth to surface beneath the polished mask. "You think this ends with you putting a bullet in me?" he said. "Because of a girl?" Dante didn't blink. "Because of the truth." Matteo leaned forward. "The truth is we're not men who get to walk away clean. We don't get endings. Just more names on the wall. You of all people should know that." "I do. So what now?" Matteo asked. "You brought your gun?" Dante reached inside his coat. Matteo moved too, but slower, hesitation. Doubt. Dante drew the weapon smoothly, raised it. Matteo froze, eyes narrowing. "You sure you want to do this?" Dante's voice was steady. "You taught me how." The silence between them shattered in a single crack. The bullet struck Matteo just below the collarbone. Center mass. No flourish. No speech. He collapsed in a heap of expensive linen and blood. Dante stood over him, waiting, watching. There were footsteps now, rushing down the hall, voices shouting, but it didn't matter. He had already walked into the fire, and this time he wasn't dragging anyone with him. Back at the house, the sun was fully up. Sera sat in the library, the windows cracked open, the air thick with the scent of moss and earth. She didn't know what time it was, didn't care. All she knew was the silence had grown heavier, the kind that settles after something has broken. She watched the road beyond the trees, waiting for a car that might never return. But she would wait, as long as it took. Chapter 10. Ruin, or something like it. The greenhouse had been abandoned long before Sera ever set foot on the estate. Half of its glass ceiling had collapsed under years of neglect, letting ivy grow wild across the floor and creeping vines to dangle from broken rafters like forgotten whispers. Moss clung to the wooden beams. The earth was soft beneath her feet. Damp. Still breathing. It had rained again last night. Not like before, no storm, no fury. Just a soft, steady drizzle that made everything shimmer beneath the morning light. The world outside had fallen quiet, not with dread this time, but with stillness. The kind that follows something irreversible. She pushed open the warped door slowly. It groaned in protest, but it held. Inside, the air was warmer. Sweet with damp soil, green with life trying to return. It smelled like something being reborn. And there he was. Kneeling beside one of the overgrown beds, sleeves rolled to the elbow, dirt smeared along the inside of his forearm, a small garden trowel resting beside his knee. Dante. Alive. She hadn't seen him arrive. There'd been no warning. No footsteps, no car, no sound of the gate. He'd simply appeared. And she stood frozen in the doorway, her breath caught between disbelief and something that ached like relief. He didn't look up right away. His hands were deep in the soil, fingers gently parting the roots of a fire lily, its petals a violent red against the dirt. He touched it carefully, like he was afraid it might bruise. Sera stepped forward quietly. "You're bleeding," she said. His voice came without hesitation. "Just a scratch." She moved to him slowly, eyes tracking the line of dried blood at his side, the edge of a stitched wound disappearing beneath his shirt. He was pale, thinner, but he was standing, breathing. "Here. I thought you were dead." "I was." He looked up now, and his eyes met hers. Something hollow in them filled in with light. "But then I remembered I made you a promise." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat felt too tight. Her body too full of everything she'd been holding back since the night he left. The silence between them swelled, not like a wall but like a wave. And when it broke gently. Dante stood slow from the strain and closed the space between them with 3 deliberate steps. He didn't reach for her. He didn't have to. She stepped into him first, pressing her forehead to his chest, her hands curling into the fabric of his shirt like she was afraid the world might steal him again if she let go. "I buried him," he said softly, his breath in her hair. "In the woods, Matteo. It's done." "And what happens now?" He exhaled, slow and long, like the first real breath he'd taken in days. "I don't know," he said. "But for the first time, I want to find out." She leaned back just far enough to look at him. His face was tired, bruised and marked and unshaven. But there was something else there, too. Something unguarded. "You should rest," she said. "You're still healing." He shook his head. "Not yet. I needed to do this first." He stepped aside slightly, motioning to the bed of flowers. The fire lilies had been planted in rows, uneven, but intentional. Red and orange, bursting through the dark soil like flames. "They were your favorite," he said, and her breath caught. "My mother used to plant them every year," she said. "She said they only bloomed where the ground had been burned." Dante nodded. "Seemed fitting." She knelt beside him. Her hands brushed the edge of the soil. fingertips touching the same earth he'd worked. There was something holy in the dirt, something soft and raw and honest. "You didn't have to come back," she whispered. "I did," he said. "Because I didn't save you just to disappear. I didn't walk through that fire so we could be strangers again." He reached out now, finally, and touched her face. Not with hunger, not with possession, just a palm against her cheek, as if to say, "You're still here, and so am I." "I'm not a good man," he said quietly. "I never was." "No," she said, "but you're the only one who didn't lie to me." He closed his eyes just for a second, let her words settle. "And you," he said, "are the only thing that's ever made me want to stop running." There was no kiss, not yet, no need. The space between them had already closed in the only way that mattered. They sat together in the dirt, surrounded by flowers that had no business blooming in a place like this. The glass above them cracked, but sunlight still streamed through. It painted the dust gold. It lit their skin, like something sacred. And in that broken, growing, quiet place, nothing had to be perfect and only real and only alive and only theirs.